I want to speak today about fatherhood. Fatherhood in our second reading, and how this applies particularly to the priesthood. And then talk about how the scandal we're going through right now is such a trial because it strikes at the heart of fatherhood. And lastly, our response to all of this. So today's second reading is one of those readings that is sort of a test to see if people are really listening. Because it's sort of a controversial reading, especially with our modern sensibilities. It can be a little bit hard to hear Paul say, wives should be subordinate to their husbands. What is he talking about? Now let me just clarify right off the bat what Paul is not saying. Paul is not saying that wives need to be sort of subservient to their husbands, almost as a servant. That wives are lesser than their husbands or anything along those lines. And sadly, there have been preachers and Christians through the ages that have taught that based on this reading. But it's a misunderstanding. That's certainly not the Catholic understanding of what Paul is saying. Notice what he says at the very beginning of all this. This is the part that people usually kind of gloss over. Be subordinate to one another. It's a mutual subordination. Wives are called to lay down their lives for their husbands. And husbands are called to lay down their lives for their wives. Now, all that being said, it is the case, however, that fathers have a unique role of leadership in any family. Fathers, in a certain sense, you could say, are the heads of their families. And this applies particularly in spiritual leadership. So I want every father in the church to raise his hand. All right. All of you guys are called by virtue of your fatherhood to be spiritual leaders in your families. You should be the ones that are bringing everyone to church every Sunday. You should be the ones that are bringing your children together at the end of every day and praying a rosary or reading scripture together or something that instills this attitude, this habit of prayer in the family. And sadly, many men among us have been a little lax in this. And usually it's the mom that's kind of dragging everyone to church. Fathers, this is your place in particular as the spiritual leader of your family. So Paul gives this teaching about wives, and then he says, husbands, love your wives, even as Christ loved the church and handed himself over to her to sanctify her. That should be the most controversial line of this reading. What did Jesus do for us? He died on the cross for his bride, the church. That is what Paul is saying husbands are called to do. So I want all the husbands to raise their hands again. You guys are called to lay down your life, to be willing to die for your bride. But that's the part that often gets overlooked, and we focus on that other controversial part that can be so twisted and misunderstood. So Paul's talking about fatherhood in a remarkable way in this reading. And I want to translate all of this into spiritual fatherhood in the priesthood. I think one of the big misconceptions about the priesthood is that it's sort of a negation of certain beauties in life. It's a negation, a taking away of a wife and children, a taking away of family, a taking away of all these things that can bring happiness. And some people might think, well, all the good men should go become fathers and dads, and all the guys that are sort of left over that maybe can't make it, they should go become priests, because they're not going to get married anyways. It'll be all right. But at the heart of priesthood is fatherhood. This same complete self-sacrifice that every father is called to is exactly what the priest is called to. And in my own discernment, it wasn't until I began to make that connection that I really began to be okay with receiving this call. For a long time, I was open to the Lord and I was sort of being led down this path, but there was still this resistance in me because I was afraid. I wanted so badly to be a father. And I thought that by becoming a priest, I would never be able to satisfy that longing deep in my heart. But it was at my first parish internship, as I began to get a real taste for what parish ministry is like. I remember towards the end of the summer coming home to an empty room every night, even though I'd been with all these people every day. You do so much, you meet so many people, you talk to so many different people. At the end of every day, it's just you and God. And I began to see that those moments of difficulty, those moments of loneliness, it's not always like that, but there are moments. Those moments are times for me to lay down my life for my bride, the church. And just as any good father should be willing to do whatever it takes to care for his wife and his children, even if it means laying down his life, so also I want to be a good father for Jesus' bride, the church. And I want to lay down my life even in moments when it's difficult. So fatherhood is what is at the heart of priesthood. And this is why, paradoxically, it's the men who would make the best of fathers of families. They're the ones who will most likely be the best priests. Because fatherhood, that's so essential to being a biological father and raising a family, is absolutely essential to the priesthood. Now, the sad side of all of this, and this is where we're going to go to the scandal that's unfolding in the church right now, is because priesthood at its essence is fatherhood, this makes the sins of our priests all the more difficult. It'd be one thing if priests were just sort of a functionary figure. They just are kind of a cog in the machine, just one piece among many. If that were the case, perhaps it wouldn't be so disheartening seeing all that's going on in the church right now. But priests are not just cogs in a machine. They're not just some functionary figure. Truly, they are spiritual fathers of spiritual families, communities, parishes. And it's all the more distressing when such great sin and hurt comes into a family at the hands of the father. If you've been paying attention to the news, you might be aware of this tragic case in Colorado of this man who murdered his wife and 2 little girls. Certainly, if that were to happen at the hands of some stranger, it would be tragic in its own way. But the fact that it was the father himself who did such a horrific thing to his own wife and children makes it all the more grotesque. And so it is in the church. The fact that these men who claim to be fathers and spiritual leaders among us doing these horrendous acts, it's very distressing. It's horrible. And what's so sad for me to see is that because of all of this scandal unfolding now, there are some parents who are hesitant to send their sons off to seminary. As you may know, some of the central accusations revolving around Archbishop McCarrick was that he was sexually abusing and harassing seminarians and living in often openly homosexual relationships. A man so prominent and so high up in the hierarchy of the church. And so what good parent would want to send their son off to that? I'm so grateful, speaking as someone who just got out of seminary. Some people think I'm still in seminary, but I am out. I'm so grateful that the Diocese of Lansing sends their men to seminaries that are so good. And I can say and the bishop isn't paying me to say this or anything, never, not once, did I encounter any of this in seminary. Not even the faintest whiff of some sort of homosexual undercurrent or some sort of sexual harassment on the account of the priests. And I know, because our bishop is so close to his seminarians, that if I ever encountered anything like that, I could have called him and he would have addressed it. So just know that our seminarians are not in a place where this is a grave issue. And I'm so glad I didn't come across this, because if I had, who knows what would have happened. I probably would have left. This is not what I signed up for, and I would never have been to this point and at this wonderful parish. So how do we respond to all of these scandals unfolding in the church? In our gospel today, Jesus is finishing up his bread of life discourse in John chapter 6. And after giving this teaching that was so difficult to understand and so jarring for his disciples, they respond, "The saying is hard. Who can accept it?" And as a result of this, many of his disciples returned to their former way of life and no longer accompanied him. How hard this must have been for the heart of Jesus. He who above all has the heart of a pastor, of a father, who wants nothing more than for his followers to come to know him and through him come to know God our Father. But some people turned away. And so he turns to his 12 apostles and he asks them, "Do you also want to leave?" And in the wake of all that's going on in the church right now, this question is so applicable to us here and now. As all this problem is unfolding around us, Jesus is saying, "Do you also want to leave?" And Peter, he's so interesting. He has moments in the Gospels where he is like totally way off. I mean, Jesus himself called him Satan once. That's how far off he was. And then he has other moments when he is spot on. It's like, "Yes, Peter, way to go." And this is one of those moments. Simon Peter answers him, "Master, to whom shall we go?" To whom shall we go? And this is exactly where I'm at with all of this. It's a very difficult time in the church, a difficult time to be a priest. And there can be temptations to doubt all of these things going on and wonder where God is in all of this, and temptations to turn away. But my thought is, if this isn't it, where else are we going to go? Jesus, to whom else shall we go? You have the words of eternal life. And yes, there are people in the church who are sinners, who are bringing these horrible things to the church and bringing so many barriers for others who are coming to know the Lord, but you are still the head of this church. And we have nowhere else to go. So Lord, help me to be faithful to you, even in these times of great difficulty. And I want to appeal especially to any young men in our parish who maybe have thought a little bit about being a priest, and maybe because of all this unfolding are sort of hesitating now. We need good priests all the more. Just think of how many people have gone through tremendous difficulties in their own families, perhaps have been hurt so badly by their own father. But sometimes it's those men who, because of the hurts that they've experienced, grow up to be the best of fathers because they want to make a family, a home that they themselves were not given. They want to be good fathers in the way that their own father wasn't. And that's the challenge I want to extend to any young men who are thinking about the priesthood. We need good priests. And just because there have been other priests before us who have sinned so grievously against the church, don't let that turn you away from something so good. And may it be a further encouragement and give you more of a desire to be a good and holy father for the bride, the church of Jesus Christ.